Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We explore the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories. If you're a returning viewer, glad to have you back, friend. Solo camping and hiking can be some of the most peaceful, rewarding experiences in nature. The solitude, the quiet, the feeling of being completely alone with the wilderness. It's almost magical. But sometimes, that very solitude can turn into something terrifying. In this video, we're diving into two horrifying, allegedly real-life encounters from people who ventured into the wild alone. The first follows a man on a solo camping trip in Skidaway Island State Park, Georgia. What begins as a peaceful escape quickly turns into a nightmare when he realizes he might not be as alone as he thought. The second story takes us to Robinson Woods, where a camper hoping to disconnect from the world discovers that someone, or something, has been watching him the entire time. By the end of these stories, you may think twice before setting off into the wilderness alone. Remember, viewer discretion is advised. This occurred roughly a year back, right in the peak of summer. I took a break from work to camp at a little lake in Skidaway Island State Park, Georgia. I had visited a few times earlier, either with family or friends, but this time I went by myself. The trek to the location where I wished to set up camp took roughly 3 hours, mainly because I frequently paused to capture brief videos and take a few photos. I had recently begun dating my girlfriend then, and I was sending her small videos to let her know that even though we were separated, she was on my mind. Additionally, I aimed to leave the more crowded paths and truly feel the solitude. The hike itself wasn't very challenging, mainly a level path the entire distance. I positioned my tent a short distance into the woods, not directly by the lake. I can't pinpoint the reason, but since childhood, I've disliked camping in open spaces with a vast view. I have always liked being among the trees. I opened my chair, cracked a beer, and began reading a book. As it was already late in the afternoon, I had limited time before the sun began to set. However, I've always cherished the night in the forest. It's serene, nearly liberating in a sense. Simultaneously, there's often a subtle tension present, not overly frightening, but sufficient to have you alert to every minor noise. It's an emotion I adore, even if I'm aware that may sound strange. After the sun set, I started a campfire and continued to unwind. However, after some time, I began to feel nervous and chose to take a brief stroll around the area. As I strolled, however, I began to feel unwell. It felt as though someone was observing me. I continued to glance at the trees, searching the shadows around me, an uncomfortable, nearly paranoid sensation creeping in. That was unlike me, and I had no clue why I felt that way. Whenever I glanced around, I found nothing. However, it was so dark that I couldn't tell if I would see anything, even if someone was watching me from out there. Since I had no real reason to feel the way I did, I tried to shake it off by distracting myself with little games. Stupid things, like counting how many seconds it took to hear an owl in the distance, or trying not to step on any flowers. Just dumb stuff we all used to do as kids. After some time, I headed back to camp. Hours passed and I wasn't even tired. It was around 1 a.m. when I suddenly heard a loud crack in front of me, like a thick branch snapping under something heavy. It came from somewhere directly ahead, deep in the pitch-black woods. The sound was loud enough to echo through the trees. I stood up instantly, my eyes scanning the trees around me. But with the firelight, there was no way I could see anything beyond its glow. It sounded like something big stepping on a branch. A large animal? Or a person? I wasn't sure which scared me more, but honestly, I was leaning toward hoping it was an animal. I grabbed my bear spray and the knife I always carried and called out, Silence. Not even the faintest sound in response. If it had been a large animal, I figured I would have heard more movement, rustling in the bushes, crunching leaves. But there was nothing. I just stood there for a minute, staring into the dark, waiting to see or hear anything. Then, out of nowhere, I thought I saw movement in the trees. I ran to my backpack, grabbed my flashlight, and flicked it on. But, by then, a minute had passed, and when I shined it in the direction of the noise, there was nothing. Still, that uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. And this time, it felt justified. There was something out there with me. This wasn't just my imagination. I quickly threw more wood on the fire to keep it burning bright, making sure my campsite stayed well lit. If it was an animal, the fire would help keep it away. But something deep inside me kept screaming that this wasn't an animal. Every couple of minutes, I'd scan the area with my flashlight. Then, at one point, when I flicked it on, I saw something. At the far edge of the light, there was a man. He was freakishly big. Not inhuman, but at least 6 feet 5 inches and easily over 250 pounds. As soon as the light hit him, he moved, stepping back into the darkness where the beam couldn't reach. My heart started pounding. He had been there the whole time, watching me. Had he been following me since my walk, hours ago? Panic hit me hard. But why? If he wanted to hurt me, why hadn't he done it already, when I was completely off guard, exposed while I was walking? There was no way I could stay there and sleep now. I tore down my tent as fast as I could, shoving everything into my backpack. I had seen which way he moved when the light hit him, so I ran in the opposite direction, back toward the main trails. I had been walking for maybe 5 minutes when I suddenly heard a sound right in front of me. I lifted my flashlight off the ground, aiming at the trees, and I saw him. He was standing there, looking right at me. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity, but in reality, it must have been just a few seconds. Then, out of nowhere, he turned and ran. That gave me confidence. He didn't seem like he was going to hurt me. He almost looked more scared than I was, like a child. I took a risk and called out, asking if he was okay, if he needed anything. It felt surreal, bizarre, but his face wasn't scary at all. It looked pleading. I walked a little further until I saw him again. Then, he dropped something on the ground. I walked over to it, and when I saw what it was, my blood ran cold. A stuffed animal. Like a teddy bear or a koala. I couldn't really tell, it was too dirty, and honestly I was too freaked out. But I took a picture of it for proof. He saw me looking at it, then motioned for me to follow him. I swear, I can't explain what made me do it. Instinct? Fate? I don't know. All I knew was that it was 2 a.m., and I was following a complete stranger through the woods. At the same time, I knew the main trail was roughly in that direction. And further up, there was an area where some park rangers were stationed, just in case things went bad. I walked until I came across what looked like a tiny cave, formed by overgrown vegetation. It was so small, I wouldn't have looked twice at it, except my flashlight accidentally hit the entrance, and I saw something move inside. Instinctively, I gripped the bear spray. Then I called out, asking if someone was in there. But it felt ridiculous. No adult could fit in that space. That's when, to my absolute shock, a small head popped out. A kid. As soon as he saw me, he ducked back inside. But I stepped closer and told him it was okay. Then, behind me, another branch snapped. I turned and saw the man again. He locked eyes with me, then with the kid. Then he smiled. A childlike smile. And without a word, he turned and walked away. I called the cops immediately. The kid had gone missing earlier that day, after I had already started my hike. They checked him out, and aside from being scared out of his mind, he was physically okay. I reported the man to the police, explaining that while the whole thing had been creepy as hell, he never really seemed like a threat. I never saw him again, never heard anything about him, but I still think about that night from time to time. I think about his scared face, his childlike smile, and I wonder what his story was. The beginning of this year was quite turbulent for me. I had just realized that the job I had worked my entire life for was, in reality, just a societal expectation, and that I was extremely unhappy doing it. On top of that, my relationship with my parents was in critical condition, so I decided to spend New Year's away from home. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. First, because my parents would never agree with the idea of me camping alone, even though I have years of experience. Second, because most of my friends were too busy with their own lives. So, I decided I would spend New Year's far away and try to extend my stay in the forest for as long as possible. My uncle had a van, so I asked if I could use it, telling him I was going to a party in another state, and that the van would be useful in case I needed to sleep in it. On December 29th, I left for Robinson Woods. My goal was to find a secluded enough spot for stealth camping while still being relatively close to an area where I could easily buy food. The first few days of traveling and camping went well. I finally had time to think, to go on hikes, to read, and most importantly, to be with myself. The more time I spent there, the more convinced I became that I needed a career change. Otherwise, that unhappiness would eventually lead me to depression. On January 5th, it was freezing cold, and I decided that instead of staying in the van, I would take a long hike. However, I quickly realized I didn't have enough food in case I couldn't make it to the nearest town the next day. So, it seemed smarter to go shopping right then, ensuring that the next day, I could hike peacefully without worrying about running out of supplies. Since I had been there for a few days, I had some things set up outside the van: a camping table, a hammock between two trees, a cooking kit, and 2 chairs, one for eating and one for relaxing. I seriously considered putting everything inside the van and setting it up again when I returned, but honestly, I hadn't seen a single person in all those days. I was isolated, and the chances of someone showing up there were extremely low. So, I decided to leave everything as it was. It wouldn't take me more than 3 hours to go to town, buy what I needed, and come back. However, when I returned, something felt alarming. Nothing was missing, but it was clear that someone had used my hammock. It was dirty, with mud stains where you'd place your feet. I had never used it with my hiking boots on, precisely to keep it clean. My heart started pounding. I felt like my space had been violated, and I wasn't as isolated as I had thought. Then, I tried to convince myself that it could have been a bear, maybe a curious one that, after seeing there was no food around, just left. But that idea didn't sit well with me. Something told me that dirt had been left by a person. I thought about leaving, but at the same time, the place still felt peaceful, so I decided to stay. At the end of the day, I lit a fire and started preparing the food I had bought. That's when, as I walked near the fire's glow, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. It had rained, so some areas of the ground were muddy. The firelight now revealed a footprint that was clearly not mine. First, it was bigger. Second, it had a completely different boot shape than mine. There was no doubt about it. That was the moment I realized it hadn't been a bear. Someone had been there, lying in my hammock, using my things. My stomach tightened, and my breath hitched as I took in my surroundings. The firelight made it harder to see. It allowed me to see the illuminated area clearly, but everything else was swallowed by total darkness. Then, out of the corner of my right eye, I saw movement. I immediately looked in that direction, but I couldn't make anything out. Fear took over me. No way I was gonna stand there, wide open, just waiting for whatever it was to come after me. So I ran to the van and locked myself inside. I wasn't completely sure I had seen something, and once inside the van, I felt a little ridiculous. Maybe I was overreacting, and my mind was just creating unnecessary scenarios, as it often did. I stayed quiet, listening carefully for any noise, but nothing. There was absolute silence outside. I was about to get up and peek through the window when suddenly, someone grabbed the door handle from the outside and tried to force it open. I was right. Someone was there with me, watching me the whole time. A surge of adrenaline shot through my body. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and sped off. I didn't stop for 30 minutes, still shaking, unable to believe what had just happened. That person had been there the whole time. But why? Why just stand there, doing nothing while I was completely exposed, outside the van, door wide open? It didn't make sense. I'll never know what they wanted. All I know is, I'm never going back to that part of the country again.